Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
We've all been there. You meet someone, you have a great conversation. A few weeks later, you run into them again, and your mind goes completely blank. You don't know their name. So what do? You use generic words like, "Hey man," or "my friend." But what happens when you meet them for a third time and you finally have to confess that you still don't know who they are? In today's story, The Name Forgetter, we're going to follow Arthur through this exact nightmare. It is an awkward, funny, and very real-life situation that will help you practice everyday English conversation, natural idioms, and vocabulary for social anxiety. Pay close attention to how the characters handle the awkward silence, and stick around until the end to learn the key phrases you can use if this ever happens to you. Let's jump right into Chapter 1.
The housewarming party was in full swing, packed with people, loud indie music, and the warm aroma of fresh pizza. Arthur stood near the kitchen island, nursing a glass of soda and feeling a bit out of place. He hated large gatherings where he only knew the host. Then a guy with an effortless smile and a vintage leather jacket walked up to grab a slice. "Hey, the guy said, but his voice was momentarily drowned by a loud burst of laughter from the living room. Arthur caught the handshake but completely missed the audio. Instead of asking the stranger to repeat himself, Arthur just nodded and smiled. "Hey, I'm Arthur. Great party, right?" For the next 20 minutes, the two hit it off instantly. They talked about their favorite local coffee shops, vinyl records, and how hard it was to find a good apartment in the city. The leather jacket guy was charismatic, funny, and incredibly easy to talk to. Arthur felt a genuine sense of relief. He had actually made a connection. Eventually, a group of people called the guy over to play a board game. "Good talking to you, Arthur. See you around," he said with a wave. "Yeah, definitely. Catch you later," Arthur replied. It wasn't until Arthur got into his car and turned the key in the ignition that the cold reality hit him. He stared at the steering wheel in total silence. He had just spent nearly half an hour bonding with someone, but he didn't have the slightest clue what the man's name was.
Two weeks had passed since the party, and Arthur had completely forgotten about the mystery man. That changed on a rainy Tuesday morning at his favorite local bakery. Arthur was standing in line, eagerly eyeing the fresh croissants, when a voice spoke up behind him. "Hey, Arthur, good to see you again." Arthur turned around, and his stomach instantly dropped. It was him, the leather jacket guy, though today he was wearing a yellow raincoat. He had the same warm, friendly smile, and he clearly remembered Arthur's name perfectly. Internal panic set in immediately as Arthur's brain scrambled for a response. "Oh, hey man, wow, what a coincidence," Arthur stuttered, praying his nervousness didn't show. "Right? I live just 2 blocks away from here," the man said, moving up in line with Arthur. "The coffee here is unmatched, honestly. Are you getting the usual?" Arthur nodded quickly, his mind desperately trying to retrieve the name that wasn't there. Was it Ben? Chris? Something with an M? "Yeah, just grabbing a quick coffee and a pastry before work," Arthur managed to say. They stood together for 5 minutes, chatting casually about the terrible morning traffic and the rainy weather. Arthur kept the conversation strictly generic, avoiding any phrasing that would require using a name. He relied heavily on filler words like dude, man, and my friend to cover up his blank memory. "Anyway, my order is up," the man said, as the barista called out a cup of black coffee. "Have a great day at work, Arthur." "Thanks. You too, man. Catch you later," Arthur waved as the man walked out into the rain. Arthur took a deep breath, feeling a mix of immense relief and deep, nagging guilt. he promised himself that he would find out the guy's name before their paths ever crossed again.
That evening, Arthur sat on his couch with his laptop, unable to shake the guilt of the morning. He was determined not to be caught off guard a third time. He opened his social media app and clicked on the profile of Leo, the friend who had hosted the housewarming party. Arthur scrolled directly to Leo's followers list and began his digital detective work. He knew absolutely nothing about the man except what he looked like and that he liked vinyl records. "Okay, let's look for a guy with short brown hair," Arthur muttered to himself, scanning the profile pictures. He clicked on a profile named Dan, but the guy in the photos had a beard. He checked a profile named Marcus, but that guy looked way too old. Then he found a Dave, who looked somewhat similar, but Dave lived in a completely different city. Arthur spent an hour clicking through dozens of profiles, feeling more like a stalker with every passing minute. He looked for photos from the night of the party, hoping to spot the leather jacket in the background of someone's selfie. Unfortunately, Leo hadn't posted any pictures from that night yet. Arthur rubbed his tired eyes, staring at the bright screen in frustration. He considered sending Leo a text message to ask, but how would he even phrase it? "Hey, who was that guy in the leather jacket I talked to for 20 minutes?" Arthur imagined writing. It felt too weird and desperate, so he deleted the draft. "Forget it," Arthur sighed, closing his laptop with a definitive snap. He decided he was just overthinking the whole situation. The city was huge, and the chances of running into the mystery man a third time were practically zero. The universe, it seemed, loved a good joke. 3 days later, Arthur found himself at a regional networking event for local businesses. The hotel conference room was packed with professionals in sharp suits, all carrying briefcases and business cards. Arthur stood near the refreshment table, trying to look important while chatting with his boss, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was a serious man who valued professional etiquette and sharp memory above all else. "The key to networking, Arthur, is acknowledging people by name," Mr. Henderson said, taking a sip of water. "It shows respect, attentiveness, and a sharp mind." Arthur nodded politely, completely agreeing with the advice. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke up from just behind Arthur's left shoulder. "Arthur? Hey, I didn't know you worked in logistics." Arthur froze mid-nod, his heart dropping straight into his shoes. He slowly turned around and faced his ultimate nightmare. It was him, the mystery man, looking incredibly sharp in a tailored navy blue suit. He was smiling broadly, clearly delighted to run into Arthur yet again. Mr. Henderson immediately turned his attention toward the newcomer, his professional curiosity piqued. "Oh, hello," Mr. Henderson said smoothly, stepping forward to introduce himself. "Arthur, aren't you going to introduce your friend to me?" The silence that hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating cloud. Arthur looked from his boss to the mystery man, his mind a complete, terrifying blank. The moment to speak arrived, and the name simply did not exist in Arthur's brain.
Arthur felt the blood rush to his face, his ears burning as the silence stretched on for a lifetime. His boss stood waiting, eyebrows slightly raised, while the man in the navy suit looked on with polite expectation. Arthur's mind raced through every possible lie, from pretending to have a sudden coughing fit to faking a ringing phone. But looking at the genuine warmth in the man's eyes, Arthur realized he couldn't keep running from the truth. He took a deep, shaky breath, deciding it was finally time to face the music. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur began, his voice trembling slightly, but I would love to introduce you, but I have a terrible confession to make." He turned fully toward the mystery man, bowing his head in deep, genuine embarrassment. "I am so incredibly sorry, but this is the third time we have met, and my brain has completely failed me." Arthur swallowed hard, forcing himself to look the man in the eye. "I know we talked about coffee and records, and I know you know my name, but I don't know yours. What is your name?" The words felt heavy as they left his mouth, and Arthur braced himself for total social disaster. Mr. Henderson blinked in utter surprise, clearly shocked by his employee's sudden lack of professional etiquette. The man in the suit stood entirely still, his expression unreadable, as Arthur waited for the ground to swallow him alive. The agonizing silence lasted for 3 full seconds, though to Arthur it felt like 3 long hours. He stood there, completely braced for a cold look of disappointment or a polite but hurt excuse. Then the man in the navy suit blinked, tilted his head back, and burst out laughing. It wasn't a polite, quiet chuckle. It was a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceiling of the conference room. Arthur blinked in confusion, his panic briefly shifting into total bewilderment. The man stepped forward, extending his right hand with a massive, reassuring smile. "I'm Julian," he said, shaking Arthur's hand firmly. "And honestly, Arthur, please do not worry about it at all." Julian chuckled again, shaking his head as he looked at Arthur's red, blushing face. "To be completely fair with you, I've been calling you Andrew in my head for the last month." Arthur's jaw dropped in absolute shock, and then the massive wave of tension in his chest completely evaporated. "Wait, really?" Arthur gasped, a nervous but relieved laugh escaping his own throat. "Yes," Julian admitted cheerfully. "I only realized your real name was Arthur when Leo mentioned it in a group chat yesterday morning." Mr. Henderson, who had been watching the entire awkward interaction with a stern face, suddenly let out a hearty laugh of his own. "Well, Julian," Mr. Henderson said, stepping up to shake Julian's hand, "it seems honesty is the best networking policy after all." Arthur wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, feeling a profound sense of relief wash over him. The ultimate social nightmare had turned into a moment of shared laughter, and for the first time, Arthur actually knew exactly who he was talking to. Even though the situation had ended in laughter, Arthur vowed never to let it happen again. The embarrassment had left a deep impression, and he was determined to fix his terrible memory. That evening, he sat down at his kitchen table and opened a notebook to research memory techniques. He quickly discovered the concept of mnemonics, which involves connecting names to vivid, ridiculous mental images. The articles explained that the human brain remembers strange, colorful pictures much better than plain words. "Okay, let's practice this," Arthur said to himself, tapping his pen against the paper. He decided to test the method the very next morning during his daily routine. When he went to the local grocery store, he looked at the cashier's name tag, which read Penny. Arthur immediately imagined a giant, shiny copper coin balancing perfectly on top of the woman's head. Later, at the gas station, the attendant introduced himself as Gary. Arthur closed his eyes for a second and pictured a massive, bright green garden snail racing down the highway. It felt completely absurd, and he felt a little silly making up such dramatic stories for strangers. But to his absolute amazement, when he walked past the gas station later that afternoon, the name Gary instantly popped into his head. The visual trick actually worked, locking the information securely into his brain. He opened his notebook again and wrote down Julian's name in big, bold letters. He spent 5 minutes creating a specific visual anchor for his new friend. "Julian," Arthur whispered, picturing the man wearing a royal golden crown made entirely of thinly sliced julienne carrots. He smiled at the ridiculous image, confident that he would never, ever forget Julian's name again. The opportunity to put his new mental trick to the test came much sooner than Arthur expected. Over the weekend, Leo invited a small group of friends over for an informal backyard barbecue. As Arthur walked up the driveway, he could hear the sizzle of the grill and the sound of familiar laughter. His chest tightened slightly with a familiar wave of social anxiety, but he quickly stopped himself. He took a deep breath and began to rehearse his mental image in his head. Julian, Julian, the man wearing a royal golden crown made of julienne carrots. Arthur walked through the wooden side gate and immediately spotted Julian standing near the drink cooler. Julian was chatting with two other people, wearing a casual t-shirt and holding a bottle of lemonade. Without allowing himself to hesitate or overthink, Arthur walked straight toward the group with a bright smile. "Hey, Julian, great to see you again," Arthur said confidently, offering a warm handshake. Julian's eyes lit up with pleasant surprise, and he returned the handshake with an appreciative grin. "Hey, Arthur, good to see you too, man," Julian replied smoothly. Arthur felt an incredible rush of victory shoot through his veins as the name rolled effortlessly off his tongue. There was no stuttering, no awkward filler words, and absolutely no internal panic this time. The mnemonic strategy had worked flawlessly, transforming a moment of potential anxiety into a smooth social success. They fell into an easy conversation about their week, completely past the awkwardness of their previous encounters. Arthur stood proudly among the group, finally feeling like he was in total control of his own memory. The dinner party moved from the backyard to the large wooden table on the patio as the sun began to set. Arthur and Julian were sitting next to each other, sharing a plate of grilled vegetables and enjoying the warm evening breeze. Suddenly, Leo walked over to the table, accompanied by a woman with curly hair who was carrying a plate of homemade dessert. "Hey guys, I want you to meet someone," Leo said, gesturing toward the woman with a bright smile. "She just moved into the apartment complex down the street last week." The woman smiled warmly at the group and set the plate down on the table. Julian immediately wiped his hands with a napkin and leaned forward politely to greet her. "Oh, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Julian," he said, extending a friendly hand. The woman shook his hand and introduced herself, her voice clear and cheerful. Julian then turned toward Arthur to handle the introduction, opening his mouth to speak. But the moment he did, Julian's face completely froze and the words died in his throat. Arthur watched as Julian's eyes widened slightly, a look of pure, unadulterated terror flashing across his face. Julian looked at Arthur, then back at the woman, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had completely forgotten the woman's name within 5 seconds of hearing it. Arthur recognized that exact look of internal panic instantly. He had lived in that nightmare for weeks. Seeing his new friend drowning in social awkwardness, Arthur didn't hesitate for a single second. He smiled warmly, leaned across the table, and extended his own hand toward the woman. "Hi there, I'm Arthur," he said, smoothly, keeping his voice relaxed and natural. "It's great to meet you, Chloe. That dessert looks absolutely amazing." Julian let out a quiet, audible gasp of relief, the heavy tension instantly draining from his shoulders. He shot Arthur an intense look of gratitude, silently thanking him for the perfect social rescue. Later that evening, the party began to wind down, leaving Arthur and Julian sitting by the fire pit with warm mugs of coffee. The crackling fire cast long shadows across the yard, creating a relaxed, comfortable atmosphere. Julian took a sip of his coffee, shook his head, and looked at Arthur with a sheepish grin. "Man, you absolutely saved my life back there with Chloe," Julian admitted, letting out a soft laugh. "My brain literally wiped her name the exact millisecond she finished saying it." Arthur laughed heartily, leaning back in his chair as the sparks drifted up into the night sky. "Believe me, Julian, I know that exact feeling better than anyone," Arthur replied. "The table turns fast in the name game, doesn't it?" They shared a long, genuine laugh over their collective memory struggles, realizing how common the fear was. Arthur realized that everyone is secretly terrified of forgetting names and that perfection isn't what builds friendships. It was the shared vulnerability, the honest confessions, and the ability to laugh at yourself that truly connected people. As the evening came to an end, Arthur pulled out his phone to order a ride home. He opened his contact list, scrolled down to the letter J, and looked at Julian's phone number. With a smile, he tapped the edit button and added a quick note right next to the name. "Julian, brackets, carrot crown," the note read. Arthur locked his phone, dropped it into his pocket, and smiled, knowing he had made a real friend for life.
And that brings us to the end of Arthur and Julian's journey. It turns out that the most awkward moments in life can actually lead to the strongest friendships. All it takes is a little bit of honesty, a willingness to laugh at ourselves, and maybe a few ridiculous mental tricks along the way. Thank you so much for watching today's story. If you enjoyed The Name Forgetter and want to keep practicing your English with real-life situations, make sure to hit that like button. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever completely forgotten someone's name like Arthur did? What did you do to get out of that awkward situation? Let me know your stories in the comments below. Keep practicing, keep learning, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.